On today's podcast, I interviewed Dr. Thomas Cowan. Dr. Cowan is a heart health expert and nutrition expert. He is the author of one of my favorite books, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, and he's also one of the founding board members of the Weston A. Foundation. Hey everyone, this is Kusha back with you on the Extra Scribe podcast, and today I have Dr. Thomas Cowan on the podcast. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best things I like to do in the beginning of this podcast is really just have the guest tell a bit about your background.
Okay. Grew up in suburban Detroit. Played a lot of basketball as growing up, and went to college at Duke. Didn't like it very much, so I graduated in 3 years, mostly to leave. Joined the Peace Corps and spent 2 years in southern Africa, a place called Swaziland. And that's where I met the work of Rudolf Steiner and Weston Price, believe it or not. That's what got me to decide to go to medical school, because I realized there was another way of doing medicine than the way that I had been exposed to, which I wasn't much enamored of. So went to medical school, did some family practice training, and have been basically in private practice since 1985. Along the way, I've helped found the Weston Price Foundation. I didn't do much, but I was there and was the original board member. And Sally Fallon and I wrote a few books, one on child care and baby, and one on just general medicine and health. And then I wrote a book on the heart, which has been a particular interest of mine for years. And along the way, founded a business that we grow and sell vegetable powders, or get them from good sources. And so I've done a few other things along the way.
Oh, nice. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the vegetables and vegetable powders. What's the name of the website?
It's Dr. Cowan's Garden, DrCowans garden.com. And it was basically founded on the idea that there's three basic food groups. There's the animal food group, there's the seeds, nuts, grains, and beans group, and then there's the vegetables with a little bit of fruit group. And my years and decades of studying traditional diets convinced me that traditional people eat about 110 different plants per year and about 15 to 20 per day. And most of them are wild and perennial vegetables. And we eat pretty good animal foods, at least the people who are Weston Price people and paleo people, wild fish and grass-fed cows and all that. But we don't approximate anywhere near the vegetable diversity that was in a traditional diet or a paleo diet. And so pretty much what we tried to do was not only diversify the access that people would have to regular vegetables like carrots and beets and leeks and kale and that, but to grow perennial vegetables and even source wild vegetables, and basically cook them and then make them into powder, and then put them in mirin jars, and then sprinkle those over food, and as a very wonderful tasting, easy, nutritious way to add diversity to your vegetable diet.
Wow, that's great. I love that. I love that. That's awesome.
It's doing really well, and the amazing thing is how great it tastes. When you take beets and you basically cook them and dehydrate them properly, you retain all the flavor and most of the nutrients, and it just adds such a wonderful flavor, like dried leeks, and it's just really has upped our nutritional culinary game.
And it's so easy. Everyone nowadays needs something easier to be able to integrate this into their lifestyle. And that's just such an easy way to integrate more variety, like you said.
Yeah, it is. And some of the things are really hard to find, like we make this perennial greens blend with tree collards and Janura and Malabar spinach, which even at the best farmer's market, you'll have trouble finding perennial vegetables.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, that's great. This is great to hear. So,
Yes.
one of the main things I want to talk about today is your book, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart, which I recently read and actually reread. I liked it so much. And I also want to talk about other stuff related to diet too. But I want to first kind of talk about the heart stuff. It's as someone like myself who's really kind of grown up more into heavy weightlifting and bodybuilding style of training and that kind of meathead mentality. I've always kind of neglected heart health and cardio training and those types of things. And since I read this book, now that I'm 30 now and I have a 2.5-year-old son, we have another baby on the way, and I've been thinking a lot more about the importance of heart health, because I'm like, okay, I want to live a long time, and I got to really start thinking about heart health now. Versus waiting till I have issues way later. So I've been thinking about it more, and this book really piqued my interest, especially since I have a very similar perspective to you in terms of kind of modern medicine and some of the maybe the drawbacks of modern medicine, and it's just really interesting what you were saying, that the modern kind of paradigm of heart disease is not really what causes heart disease. So I guess to kind of get started, can you tell us a little bit about what's the real cause behind heart disease?
Yeah. Well, just to put the book in perspective, so there's basically two separate, somewhat interwoven parts of this book. The first was basically my exploration of a quote from Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of anthroposophy and Waldorf schools and biodynamics and even anthroposophical medicine. And he said one of the most important things for people to understand is that the heart does not pump the blood around the body. And the surprising thing about that is if you ask the next 100 people who walk down the street, including 50 of them if they were cardiologists, why does the blood move in the body? They would all say because the heart pumps the blood around the body. So that's like mother's milk. We all learned that. We all believe it. And it's frankly, it's nonsense. And it's pretty easily proven that it's nonsense. And that was a big part of the book. And then I went on to elucidate why the blood does move in the body. And if it's not the heart that's pushing it, why and how does it move? And we could get into that if you want, but that's not what the question you asked. But I just wanted to point that out. And I also want to point out that there's really two people right now who are talking about this. There's me, and there's a guy named Bronco First, who's an anesthesiologist. And Bronco is a much more of an academician than I am. And he wrote a book called The Heart and the Circulation, an Integrative Approach, which I would warn people is only for the real scientific self-flagellators, I guess, because it's a pretty dense, difficult read.
It's like a Ray Kurzweil book.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, he just goes into the real nitty gritty of what an anesthesiologist and physiologist needs to know about the circulation of the blood. The reason I bring that up is he came to the same conclusion that I did, that the heart cannot possibly be in a pump. It's an impedance device. And we also have a website, humanheartcosmicheart.com, and I put articles on there. And I put an article by Bronco called The Heart, Pump, or Impedance Device. If that's a little easier to read than his book. This was a bit of a long-winded explanation to say, though, that in the foreword of the book was written by two cardiac anesthesiologists. One was the head of cardiac anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School, and the other was the head of pediatric cardiac anesthesiology at Harvard. And they both say they agree with Branko that the heart can't be a pump. That's why we do no better treating congestive heart failure for the last 50 years, because we simply don't understand what the heart is doing or why the blood moves. And so we can't possibly treat heart failure without knowing why what the heart is doing and why the blood moves. I only point that out to say, for those of you who hear this and think that sounds strange, I'm not the only one. And you could argue that two people who know more about cardiac physiology than anybody alive both agree. So it's not as crazy as one might think. Now, to get to your question, what's the problem with heart disease? Again, I like to say that if you ask 100 cardiologists or 100 people on the street, why do people have heart attacks? They say, well, because you have these 3 coronary arteries and they get blocked with plaque, and people would argue about why they get blocked with plaque, but that they get blocked with plaque is not an argument, as everybody agrees with that. And then because of that blockage, the blood can't get through, and then downstream from the blockage, you can't get blood through, and then the heart doesn't get enough oxygen, and then you have a heart attack. And so for the last number of decades, all of the interest in cardiology has been, why do the blockages happen? Is it because of eating too much fat? And lately it's because of inflammation. And how do you unblock the blockages? Does that happen with statin drugs by lowering the cholesterol? Should you do it with bypasses or stents or angioplasties? In other words, the whole shebang, the whole dialogue in cardiology has been about the plaque. Mm-hmm. Now, I come along, and these are not things that I made up myself, but I come along and write a book that says, hey, wait a minute, plaque is by no means the predominant reason why people have heart attack. Blocked arteries are not the reason that most people have heart attacks. Now, the legitimate question is, where did I get that from? So interestingly, there was a huge debate, even the beginning of cardiology in 1940s when heart attacks started being more common. Most of the cardiologists, believe it or not, did not agree with the plaque theory, the coronary blockage theory. In fact, they said that people with blocked arteries had less heart attacks than people with blockages. Eventually, there was a lot of studies on that, and one of them it's reprinted in a book by a guy named Baroldi, who is an Italian pathologist who spent 40 years doing autopsies on people who died of heart attacks. And it's really the definitive book and the definitive study ever done. It's actually reprinted on another very good website called heartattacknew.com. And at the bottom, there's a print version, and you can actually download the book. It's a pretty dense read, too, but if you're scientific glutton for punishment, you can do it. And I read it 3 or 4 times. And after 40 years, he concludes that 41% of heart attacks are associated with a significant blockage to that part of the heart. And of those 41%, 50% of the blockages come after the heart attack, not before, which means that only 20% of the heart attacks are caused by blocked arteries, which is astounding, because then it begs the question, so what caused the other 80%? Mm-hmm. And the interesting issue is, until literally the last, say, 3 or 4 months, and I can tell you why in a minute if you want, there's been no discussion about that, no dialogue, no acknowledgement, even though basically everybody knows it's true. Uh, and again, if you want, I can tell you why that changed.
Yeah,
But
why is that? Yeah, I'm curious.
well, it changed because you would think if the problem is totally, you have a heart and then you have these three major arteries called coronary arteries, and if they get blocked with plaque, then blood can't get through. If that's the case, you would think if you do a bypass, which bypasses the blockage, or a stent, which opens the blockage, that should solve the problem. So back in 2004, 2005, there was a bunch of studies. One was called the Courage Study, was in the New England Journal of Medicine, I believe. And they studied stents, which should have solved the problem. And what they found was that there was no change in the death rate or the incidence of follow-up heart attacks, whether they did stents or not, or bypasses. So all these people, this 50 billion plus, maybe more, that's probably a huge underestimation of medical interventions, stents and bypasses, have never been shown to prolong people's lives or prevent them from having heart attacks, which is certainly curious if that was the only reason why people have heart attacks. But they did say, well, it may not do that, but it does prevent angina or chest pain. And so that's pretty much the reason why people do stents and bypasses. They don't necessarily tell you that, but that's the official indication. Then for the first time, literally first time ever, published in the Lancet in October 2017, they actually in England did a double-blind study of stents. So they took people with a single vessel blockage who had chest pain. Half of them they put a stent in. The other half they just put the catheter in and then took it out without doing anything. They told them they fixed the blockage. And then they saw what happened to them. 8 weeks later, they were exactly the same. No change in their heart symptoms, no change in their angina. Which means that even the final indication for stents and bypasses, which is chronic unremitting angina, it turns out it's basically a placebo effect. It's hard to believe, but that's what they found. And that's the only study that ever did that with a placebo trial. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, there was some comment on it because the New York Times ran it with the headline, "Stents Proven Useless." Again, this is, $50+ billion industry a year. The Atlantic magazine did an article on it, "Stents are useless." They had a cardiologist comment on it, and she said, well, cardiologists always knew that coronary artery disease is more than just focal blockages. It's a systemic disease, and the blockages are only one manifestation of. Now, when I read that, I can tell you I almost fell off my chair because, first of all, I've never heard a cardiologist acknowledge that the blockages are only a small part of this disease. Mm-hmm. And second of all, if she's saying that this is a diffuse systemic disease, I happen to be doing a podcast on Mercola the next day or so about this article. And I said everybody should wake up, every heart patient should wake up tomorrow. This is probably not a very nice thing to say, and ask their cardiologist, which diffuse systemic disease are you treating me for? Mm-hmm. Because personally, I've never heard any cardiologist acknowledge that there is one. Mm-hmm. But that's what I wrote the book about. What is this diffuse systemic disease that is the root of this, of why people have heart attacks and die of heart disease, and of which blockages are only one manifestation of, and maybe not even the most important manifestation. So that's essentially what I wrote the book about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was really interesting to me how I never even realized that the heart has this, collateral venous system as a backup, I was always of the mindset too that if you have an arterial blockage like that, there's no way for the heart to get blood.
Well,
And
except it's not a collateral venous system. It's a collateral system made up
got
of
it.
capillaries, which are
Got it.
not veins.
Oh, okay, got it.
And I'll tell you, if anybody wants to be convinced that the heart, even from birth, has a robust collateral circulation, they should, again, go to this website called heartattacknew.com, and they should watch the video, and they should go to the frequently asked questions, and then the riddle solution, I think, is figure 1. And you can see a picture of a normal heart with all its collateral vessels. One of the reasons I got into thinking about this was, I don't know how many times in my career I've had something like the following scenario. So 50-year-old or 60-year-old guy, it's usually men, comes in, he doesn't feel that great, a little bit tired, has a little bit of chest pain walking up Mount Tam yesterday. It's a 5-mile walk, and he did it, but he didn't feel like he usually does. So wife convinced him to go to the cardiologist, goes to the cardiologist does an angiogram, says, you have a 93% blockage. If you block any more, you're going to have a heart attack. I don't know how many times I've heard that scenario, but it's more than 50 or so.
Wow.
Now, if we dissect that scenario a little bit, assuming like we're told that like you thought, all the blood that goes to the heart goes through these major coronary arteries. That means this guy who just walked up this 5-mile hill has 7% blood flow to a major part of the heart. And so my question would be, how in the heck did that guy walk up the hill with 7% blood flow?
Exactly.
And then my second question is, you mean to tell me that if he blocks from 7% down to 4%, that's curtains. He's going to die of a heart attack. As if there's any difference between 5%, 7%, 3%, 2%. Those are all the same.
Yeah.
That's no blood flow.
Yeah, it's basically nothing.
Right. So none of that makes any sense, right? Just on the face of it, that doesn't make any sense. What?
Yeah, it makes no sense. Yeah, it doesn't
no
make
sense.
It makes no sense to me.
And you know how many people have had stents or bypasses based on exactly that line of reasoning? It's in the millions.
Wow. That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Even the amount of people on statins and all these drugs.
Right. Statins, which at best improve your chances by about 1% to 2% at the cost of increased cancer risk, increased dementia, loss of IQ, increased atrial fibrillation, increased heart failure, muscle weakness, liver failure. I mean,
Yeah, it's just not worth it. For the risk versus rewards doesn't sound like it's really worth it.
It's not worth it. And it's all because that's why, this argument, should we do the Pritikin diet, no fat, or paleo diet? It's always been about the plaque.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm here to say is, I'm not saying that plaque is good or it has no relevance, because it has some.
Mm-hmm.
There are some places that having plaque is not good. But the whole thing is fundamentally misguided. It's about the heart as a metabolic organ, which, and it has the same dynamics as essentially treating our metabolism, which means good food and good water and, exercise and all the rest. But my point is that this maniacal focus on the coronary artery aspect has really led us astray.
Yeah, it's funny because Western medicine, it seems like it always kind of tries to focus on the symptoms. It always focuses on kind of what it can see. And I think that's kind of why this whole paradigm has been around, the plaque and instead of around kind of what you talk about in the book around like autonomic balance
Right.
and kind of what's really behind it, what's downstream, what's really behind the whole root of heart disease to begin with. And you don't really see that typically in Western medicine, at least not yet.
Yeah, right. They tend to focus on things which you can affect with a procedure or a pharmaceutical intervention. I often describe conventional modern medicine as, first of all, it's a very radical philosophical approach to life. They think of themselves as conservative, but it's a very radical approach. They basically have taken the opinion that the only way a human being can heal is with patent pharmaceutical medicines. And that's an extremely radical view.
Exactly.
Of well, how did we get here over I don't know how many years
Without pharmaceuticals.
without pharma, and yet they completely deny that anybody has ever healed or could heal by doing anything besides pharmaceutical medicine. That's what they're trained in. That's what I was trained in. You have a set of symptoms, your blood pressure's too high, and you match that up with a pharmaceutical drug to lower the blood pressure. Never mind why the blood pressure is too high. Maybe it's a compensation for poor flow. So the body just decided to clamp down the vessels to make the flow better. And that's why whenever you really investigate outcomes, no matter whether it's chemotherapy or stents or blood pressure drugs or whatever, there's very few of them that really pass much mustard.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like the kind of the root behind a lot of this is autonomic balance. Is that correct? That tends to be kind of at least one of the leading kind of causes of heart disease and probably many diseases. Is probably just too sympathetic dominant in today's kind of modern world. Go, fight or flight, constantly stressed, not enough sleep.
Well, that's certainly one. And, I basically pointed out three separate areas that contribute. One is this autonomic nervous system balance, like you say. Now, conventional medicine definitely recognizes that, which is why they use beta blockers, which block the sympathetic nervous system. But the research shows, particularly heart rate variability testing, that it's not so much sympathetic excess that causes people to have heart attacks, but chronic parasympathetic suppression. And I would agree that those are similar, but they're not the same. To have a robust parasympathetic nervous system and then occasional bouts of sympathetic activity is called normal life. Mm-hmm. Like life is good and then a bear's chasing you and then you run. So that's normal. I mean, assuming you get away from the bear.
Yep.
But what's not normal is due to chronic stress, chronic poverty, financial instability, smoking, no exercise, poor food, lots of things. Your parasympathetic system is chronically suppressed. Those are the situation that people have heart attacks. So that's one. The second is poor microcirculation. It's the microcirculation that protects the heart. And this is affected by things that particularly affect blood sugar, like diabetes. Smoking affects the microcirculation, not the macrocirculation. So diabetes, smoking, and all those things affect the microcirculation. And the third is people who have heart disease have a metabolic imbalance, and that's causing them to not be able to generate enough energy in their cells. And then they, just like if you don't have enough energy in your leg when you run, you start going what's called, you make a glycolytic shift, you go anaerobic and you start making lactic acid.
Mm-hmm.
And that causes pain and cramps in your leg, and then your leg stops. And a very similar thing happens in the heart cells. The heart becomes anaerobic. It goes so-called glycolytic shift. You start fermenting instead of respiring to make energy. Then that builds up lactic acid, and that's what we call angina. The difference between your heart and your leg is your leg can stop and your heart can't. So the heart keeps going, keeps contracting, not pumping, but it does contract. And that prevents the calcium from getting into the cells, which essentially paralyzes them, which is what you see on echocardiograms or thallium tests. You see a partially or totally paralyzed heart. And that is accountable because of this fermentation metabolism and the acidosis, which then prevents the calcium from getting in the cells. If this keeps going because the heart can't stop, then you get a acidosis in the tissues, which causes necrosis, which was what we call a heart attack. So the steps are perfectly laid out as to actually what causes heart attacks. And the plaque thing is only a minor contributor. The real issue, like with cancer and like with any metabolic disease, diabetes, it's a poor energy flow. And that can't be treated by bypasses, stents, or statins, which actually make it worse. It has to be treated by, good diet and good exercise. And there's a herbal extract that I talk about in the book, which actually addresses all three of those, called strophanthus, because it supports the parasympathetic nervous system, it increases the microcirculation, and it actually converts lactic acid into pyruvate, so it breaks the cycle and essentially stops people from having angina or going on to have a heart attack. So I have a whole program of, what people can do to sort of prevent this, or, I mostly get involved with treating people who actually already have heart disease.
Mm-hmm. So is this something, this G. strophanthus, is this something that someone should use kind of like on a regular basis, or this is something that should be used kind of preemptively for somebody who, may be experiencing symptoms, or, somebody who has like a specific reason to be using it?
Well, it's not easy to get, so most people couldn't use it even if they wanted to. Right now, believe it or not, we're the only supplier in the U.S.
Wow.
It's because it comes from a plant called strophanthus, which makes seeds which have an active ingredient called wabein, which is what does all these three things. So we have a system. You can go to the Human Heart, cosmicheart.com, and there we have a system of distributing it to practitioners to use with their patients. And we have a number of practitioners who are already doing this. And that's sort of my mission now, to make this medicine more widely available, because it is, we have all these case studies now. It's really an amazing help for the heart. Mm-hmm. As far as to answer your question, I wouldn't give it to somebody who has no symptoms or no heart issues.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it's not like a multivitamin. You're not just taking it every day just for safety and peace of mind.
I wouldn't do that. But if somebody has any kind of heart dysfunction or angina, or I even use it for high blood pressure or congestive heart failure, or has had a heart attack or had a stent or had a bypass, those people, I pretty much use it, and use it kind of indefinitely, but not as a, preventative in the sense of preventing somebody to have a heart attack, yes, mm-hmm. who has heart disease, but not a normal person, whatever that is.
Well, if somebody's not necessarily experiencing symptoms, but they're, just want to maintain proper autonomic balance, long-term heart health, what kinds of things should they be doing? What kind of lifestyle changes would you recommend, or exercise or diet would you kind of recommend for that?
leave the U.S., go find a saner place to live and grow your own food and live the way humans are more meant to live. Mm-hmm. Now, short of that, I would do some of those things, like really examine, what the goals and priorities of your life. If it's just to make money and accumulate wealth and increase your stress, then good luck, But if you want it needs to be a life that's balanced and happy and includes physical activity. Some people call it exercise, but humans are meant to move, whether it's walk or garden or push a wheelbarrow or run or play or swim or whatever. And then you have to eat good food, hopefully either grown by yourself or somebody that you know from a farmer's market or a co-op or something. Mm-hmm. I have ideas in the book on what I mean by a good diet. Okay. So physical activity, good social relations, good relations, with your significant other or spouse or whoever, all the things that make life worth living, at least for me. So that's the basic. And also security, which these are things that are hard to come by in our present situation. People are scared and insecure and lots of other things for good reason, because that's the game. So that's where I would start.
That makes sense. And I know in the book you also talked about structured water and this fourth phase of water, and then you kind of talked about how that relates to the blood flow in the body and how it's actually circulating. Just for our audience to kind of get, I guess, somewhat of an understanding, what exactly is structured water? I mean, I don't want to share too much from the book. I'd rather people go and pick up a copy and learn more that way. But just kind of on a surface level, what exactly is structured water, and how does that relate to the human circulatory system?
We're told that matter exists in three phases: solid, liquid, and gas. So if you take something like copper has solid copper, molten or liquid copper, and gaseous copper. And every other substance, every other molecule, exists in those three phases. Now, I started thinking about this, I started as an ER doctor 35, 40 years ago. And I was told that the human body has a lot of water, that the cells contain 70% water. This is intracellular, not blood, not cerebrospinal fluid, not lymph, not urine. We're talking about inside the cells. Mm-hmm. So as an ER doctor, I saw a lot of people who were injured, shot, gouged, whatever, and you would think if 70% of their cells were water, and then if you ask the question, which phase is that water in, it's not ice, so it can't be solid, and it's not a gas, so it can't be steam, so it must be liquid, which means it's water. So you would think that you would see a puddle of water on the floor next to a person with a gunshot wound. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that never happens. And you never see any water coming out of a human being or any other biological system. I mean, you could say sap, but let's keep it to people. So that got me questioning, where's the water? Next thing is you start examining things like Jell-O. So Jell-O it's not ice, and it's not water, and it's not steam. And so the bottom line is water, and only water, has an intermediate phase between solid and liquid. And that's what Gerald Pollack has been investigating for decades, and he calls it the fourth phase of water. And all of the water inside a living cell, biological cell, a human cell, is in this gel or fourth phase or structured phase. And if it isn't, that's a big problem. In fact, an MRI machine is a device for examining whether the water is properly in that fourth phase. And if it's not, if it's, say, too hardened or unstructured, it picks up the signal and says there's something wrong here, and often it's something like cancer. So the fourth phase is basically everything. That our whole physiology, in a sense, is based on keeping the water in our cells in this fourth phase, because that creates the charge around the cell. It is the sodium-potassium pump, not this mythical pump in the membrane that they talk about. It basically runs human physiology, and we don't have time to talk about this, but it's basically the basis of consciousness. Now, the interesting thing about it, to answer your question, when this gel phase forms, Pollack has proven this, it actually creates a separation of charges. So if you make the fourth phase, it becomes negatively charged, and it pushes the positive charges, the protons, into the bulk water or the liquid water. And that's what happens inside your blood vessels. The blood vessels structure the water. That creates negatively charged gel phase protecting the vessels, and the positive charges go into the liquid part, which we call blood. The positive charges repel each other, and that's what gets the blood moving. Mm-hmm. That is the pump, and not the heart. So the fourth phase of water dynamics, which unfortunately, most scientists either don't recognize or never heard of, or because they're stuck in this matter has three phases paradigm, they deny it. And most doctors have never heard of it, so they don't know anything about it. But that actually is the reason for the circulation. And that's what I essentially tried to demonstrate in the book. It's very simple. You can prove that that's what happens. It's also the same device or same mechanism that causes the sap in a tree to flow. It's a very conserved mechanism across all of nature. And, again, unlike what we're led to believe, humans are part of nature. We are a biological system, and we use the same dynamics. And the fourth phase of water dynamics is probably the most important thing. It actually, I've even got more into it and wrote another book, which is coming out soon. And then hopefully there's going to be even a follow-up book, which get deeper and deeper into just what is happening with the water and why it's so important.
Wow. No, this is great. Nobody is thinking about circulation or just even physical health and well-being in this viewpoint, in this paradigm. So this is really interesting stuff. This is really fascinating.
Yeah, I wouldn't say nobody, but
yeah,
it's not,
I'd say most people, I think, the average person probably doesn't know this yet. And that's what makes this podcast episode so great, because, it's really helping people get clarity on what's really happening.
Well, I can tell you that, in many of the, I know a lot about this, sort of my thing, but most of the significantly beneficial medical interventions throughout history have actually worked because they actually affect the structuring of water. So, for instance, there's this thing called the Rife machine, which was documented to cure most people of cancer. And it's basically a water structuring energy device. Acupuncture essentially creates a field effect which helps structure the water. The Gerson therapy, which was a very popular cancer therapy, works on structuring the water. I could go down the list. Energy healing, laying on of hands, Lourdes water in France. All these things are basically ways of increasing the structure of the water, which then increases the flow and the ability of the cells to detoxify. And it's the amount of interest in this is, it's sort of like a tsunami wave that's coming. And the conventional medical establishment will try to hold it back because they're going to get drowned by it, I think.
Yeah.
Or I hope. And it's going to, it's everything from cheap energy or even free energy, because if you separate charges, which is what happens just through the interaction of water and sunlight, that's a battery, and that can drive, a car or whatever. And human beings, our health is dependent on our ability to generate a charge. When we lose the charge, like a battery, we die or get sick or both. So you're going to hear more and more about this in the people who really are in the know about the relevance of water, structured water, and how to use simple devices and everything from walking on the beach to drinking structured water to, help human beings have better health.
Now, let's talk about drinking structured water. I know you talked about that in your book, but how would the average person structure their water at home? If they wanted to drink structured water on a daily basis, do they need special equipment to do that? How would they go about doing that?
So the first question about that is, when I talk about structured water in the cells and in the circulation, there's a bit of a leap from whether because you drink structured water, and then does that mean the water in your body is going to be structured? Like that could be, it also could not be. And I would say at this point in my investigation in this, I think it helps structure the water, but I don't have any actual proof of that. So I don't want to make too big of a thing on drinking structured water, even though it's possible that drinking structured water helps you structure the water. But again, like I say, it's possible it doesn't.
Yeah.
So there's basically two ways that I know of. One is to put whatever water you have into a vortex, which then structures the water. And by the way, when we're talking about structured water, that's not a nebulous concept. There's actually very specific electromagnetic peaks that have to do with the bond angles of the hydrogen and oxygen in the water that tell you whether the water is structured or not. It's not like some people say, oh, there's no meaning to that or whatever. It's a very specific, physics concept where you can give Pollack's lab, any random water, and they can say, well, it has this peak at 270 nanometers. It's structured by, or 5% of it is. And if it has no peak, it's not structured. And if it's 100% that peak, which never will be, but if it was, it would be a gel. It's not a nebulous concept. So the things that do that create this structured peak are putting water in a vortex. And there is also a company that has essentially figured out how to create water that has that peak in it, which I'm sort of working with and investigating to see what the biological effects on that. Interestingly, when you go to these, people have heard of these different spas or water places around the world, like Lourdes in France, and there's some in Bulgaria, and, these famous, healing spots, Levico in Italy, they all have this same structured water peak in them. And so that's why I'm interested in whether drinking structured water may be the reason why people have these kind of outcomes when they go there. Not everybody, unfortunately, but some people do.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember a long time ago I went to a friend's house and he had this device that was like had magnets on it and it was spinning the water, and he said it was a structured water type of device, and I didn't know
Yeah.
anything about it at the time, but kind of makes a little bit more sense to me now, kind of what it was trying to replicate. So it's
Yeah,
really
right.
interesting.
I do that with my water. I have a vortexing device, and it's based on it creates essentially a magnetic field that creates, like looks like a tornado in the water. And if you structure it for 9 minutes or 18 minutes, you can demonstrate that it has more of this structured water bond angles in it than if it's just flat. And that corresponds, it's like I tell people, if you were hiking in the woods and you came upon two streams side by side, and one of them was just flat, so the water wasn't moving, and the other was moving in a typical vortex pattern down the stream, which one would you drink?
Mm-hmm.
And I think anybody with any sense would drink the one that's moving.
Yeah.
Because we all know that somehow moving water is better for you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it tastes better. It's better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all we're doing. And, if you think about it, if you're drinking bottled water, it's been sitting in this bottle for what, a month, maybe,
Yeah.
or maybe 3 years, or who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah. So it's certainly not moving.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you ever feel any different when you drink structured water versus when you would drink normal water? Do you actually feel any difference kind of immediately when you do that, or is it more of a long-term thing?
Some people do. I tend not to myself, but I don't have that much. I don't have many symptoms that would get better. I mean,
Sure.
I'll get older, so I ache a little bit sometimes. But if I weed too much, particularly, which I did yesterday, 4 hours of weeding,
Nice.
that
Nice.
makes you stiff. But no, I mean, you can certainly taste the difference. It feels more velvety or smooth or silky, or there's whatever word you want to use for it. But I don't think you drink it and all of a sudden, you can lift more weight or something.
Okay, got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been great. I mean, that kind of wraps up a lot of my questions for today around these topics, and it's been just groundbreaking reading this stuff and just speaking with you today. It's just been eye opening, just about how the heart works, how circulation really works, and kind of what the root causes are behind a lot of these diseases. It's fascinating stuff, and I think people really need to be more aware of this stuff so they can take kind of their health into their own hands and actually do something about it rather than just getting a procedure done or taking some pharmaceutical drug and not getting the outcomes they want. So this has been great.
People really need to think twice about taking drugs or doing procedures. And then after they thought twice, think another time.
Exactly. Well, thanks again for being on the show today, and hopefully we'll have you on here again soon. And again, if people want to check more of your stuff out, what links should they go to?
The best two are humanheartcosmicheart.com and drcowansgarden.com. That's DRCOWANS garden.com.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.